What's up, fine people? I want to talk about the future of Ghost Recon. I could spend an entire long video talking about why open worlds are inevitably and almost inherently inferior for tactical shooters. Maybe I'll do that another day. However, this video is going to be about why open levels are the best setting for Ghost Recon. I never hear anyone describe games as open level. Despite it being self-explanatory, I will describe the term. Essentially, they are tiny open worlds. Instead of being placed in the world and choosing which missions you want to do, you are placed into the level and choose which objectives you want to do. They have multiple routes, allowing you to tackle the mission in multiple ways. If you want a modern example, Hitman 3, or whatever they changed its name to, has small open levels. For Ghost Recon, there should be large open levels, most being over 1 kilometer wide, allowing ample room for scouting and sniping. There should be multiple insertion points too, giving players options for ingress and egress. Before I get deep into this, I want to mention recordings. Ghost Recon 1 had them. They are, surprise, recordings of the mission. You can enable automatic recordings or manually record. It logs all of the information required to recreate the events of the mission. The details include positions of actors, angles of aim, projectiles, and whatever other dynamics occur. It saves everything to a file, and the file is extremely small compared to a video recording. Then you can enter the replay system and delete or watch videos. Because it recreates the events, you can change perspectives, seeing through the eyes of any soldier or using free cam. You can rewind, fast forward, pause, and so on. Recordings allow players to make cinematic videos for any mission. Because of the small file size, you can record everything and not worry about missing something spectacular. The developers could add filters or whatever else people use in photo modes, and they could add a feature that automatically deletes the oldest recording once a certain folder size is reached. It might be possible to have such a system in an open world, but I'm not sure how automatic recordings would work. It definitely works in open levels though. Now let's get into the arguments for why Ghost Recon thrives in open levels instead of an open world. If you watched my video about why Ghost Recon should have attributes, you will recognize this format. First, I'll touch upon the history. Tom Clancy's shooters started as open level games with Rainbow Six and then Ghost Recon. The precedent has been set, and open levels were the perfect setting for Tom Clancy games. They allowed the special military units to travel across multiple countries in one game. That opens the door for stories that simply cannot realistically occur in a single stage. Tom Clancy's stories were geopolitical and international. Ghosts are supposed to be the tip of the spear. They're supposed to be the ones who execute the initial attacks across the battlefront, spanning multiple cities, provinces, and even countries. I think there is room for an occasional open-world Ghost Recon game, and there can even be an open-world mode in every Ghost Recon game. But the campaign for most Ghost Recon games should occur in open levels. They allow the player to attack the mission in multiple directions, but still be guided through a logical story, unlike in Wildlands or Breakpoint. They're also not linear experiences like in Call of Duty's campaign, though that might be exactly the sort of thing Ubi has been working on, heavily scripted and linear missions similar to Future Soldier, the game that killed Ghost Recon but welcomed the modern audience. Ghost Recon is meant for open levels, and it's past time to return to them. The final part of this history section is about briefings. They were a staple of Tom Clancy's games, including Splinter Cell. There was something that felt very serious and official about them. It would hype the players for the next mission at the same time as telling the story and explaining the objectives. The briefings are mostly absent from the modern Ghost Recon. However, Wildlands has a video that plays when the player enters a new province. Those videos were my favorite part about the game. They were ridiculous at times, but they were also the most authentic feeling aspect of the game, along with a couple of parts and cutscenes. So the best parts of the first open world so-called Ghost Recon game were when the player was not in the open world. Ubi had to take the player out of the world in order to make it feel real. Secondly, I will move to the realism section. Now I could talk about how open levels are more realistic for the game, but that's going to heavily overlap with the subject of gameplay, like getting stuck on objects and terrains that were sloppily placed because the open world is enormous. Instead, I'm going to talk about real life. Ubisoft is not the same corporation or company that it once was. Ubisoft Paris took over Ghost Recon with Advanced Warfighter. They only made the console version, and that was the less realistic and less tactical version. It was still a good game, and I'd even say it was a tactical shooter and a good Ghost Recon game, despite lacking important features. However, I strongly expect that most of the people who made the GRAW games are working elsewhere now. Future Soldier was not a tactical shooter, Wildlands was even more of an action shooter, and Breakpoint was a hodgepodge. We don't have any evidence that the current Ubisoft Paris can make a tactical shooter, let alone a great one that deserves the Ghost Recon name. Imagine that you've never painted a human figure. Do you think it's smarter to start by painting a bunch of figures at the top of the Sistine Chapel? Or is it smarter to start with relatively small canvases? It is unrealistic to expect Ubi to be able to make a sublime tactical shooter set in an open world. I've never seen anyone do it. Instead, Ubi should build an open-level Ghost Recon to prove that they can actually make a tactical shooter. That way, there won't be any question as to whether the open-world setting is hindering them. Also, with all of the features that Ghost Recon should have, it's much easier and more realistic to achieve that in open levels. It will be more polished. Arma 3 has open-world modes, but they are never as tactical or polished as the missions that don't have enemies spawning in constantly. Before I move on from realism, I want to mention this story. Open worlds actually become restrictive for games such as Ghost Recon. It forces the entire plot to occur in one city or a collection of unbelievably small cities. That's not how Tom Clancy stories were written. We should be traveling to multiple cities and even multiple countries. That's how war works. That's how preventing a war works. They could do multiple open worlds, but that still doesn't explain why the ghosts choose whichever mission they want to do next, why they're wandering around killing whomever, why they steal vehicles when they're supposed to be covert, why all of the events take place conveniently when the ghosts arrive, regardless of the day, and so on. Open levels are much more realistic for a game about war. It's time for the meat and potatoes, gameplay. Since I already mentioned it, I will start this section by pointing out that it's more realistic. There are many ways to understand that. Many of the ways are inevitable and others are inherent. It's not realistic to run around carjacking civilians, flying aircraft, watching enemies spawn, base jumping, etc. Having dead bodies and dropped gear stay in the level is more realistic than despawning them from the world. It's also not realistic to have all of the missions be completed by the same 4 men, yes, men only is how it should be, in the same area, choosing when and how to complete the missions. They're not pilots or a tank crew. There should be 8 or more men given orders for specific strategies and times. They should be transported in, complete the mission on foot, and then be transported out. Speaking of transports, one of the more annoying parts of Wildlands and Breakpoint was the spawning of enemy vehicles. I literally watched them spawn within 100 meters. Even when they spawn off-screen, it was never far. In open levels, every enemy can already be spawned in before the player is. You don't need to see an enemy materialize when you're within 500 meters of the base like in Wildlands. The enemies will be there even if the map is 5 kilometers wide with long sight lines, allowing realistic scouting and sniping. If reinforcements are needed, they can either spawn or path from outside the playable area. Invisible walls have a bad reputation in gaming, but going AWOL is a real thing. Rather than an invisible wall, there could be no-go zones that warn the player via the radio or teammates to return to your mission. That allows ample space for reinforcements to arrive while maintaining authenticity to the military. You have to follow orders like an actual soldier in a true Ghost Recon game. Failure to comply would result in either a failure screen or a teammate shooting you for treason. Time is also more realistic. In open levels, time can bounce around, allowing for a more believable and flexible campaign. You can do a mission in New York and then do a mission in Nevada 2 weeks later with only a brief loading screen separating them. You can do simultaneous missions in China and Taiwan. You can even travel back to World War II and complete a mission from the past. In an open world, in order to get the same results, it would do the same thing, load a new terrain and mission as the player is shown a loading screen. So what's the benefit of the open world? It's mindlessly traversing the terrain while brain-dead enemies spawn around you. That's not tactical. They have to be brain-dead. The campaign either has to be impossible or unrealistic. Real military campaigns are not executed by a fire team that goes wherever they want, whenever they want, and doing whatever they want. The same logic applies to games. If games are trying to be realistic, then they belong in open levels, and Tom Clancy games are supposed to be realistic. Handcrafted missions and levels are quite superior. Every rock, tree, building, barrel, and path can be placed with intention, all while considering where the player can be and which tools they will have. With fewer considerations, the polish can gleam. All of the enemies can be chosen to fit the level designer's vision. The designer can specifically deploy an Op-4 fire team that is vulnerable to an ambush. Targets can be placed in order to be visible from certain Overwatch positions. Players can be guided to angles which will show a hostage situation. Intention is exponentially more likely to succeed in smaller spaces that players know was composed by a mind instead of an algorithm, and you don't have to worry about random spawns ruining the flow of the mission. Video games are supposed to be an art. Open world games are more of a craft. Immersion is broken when enemies are simply spawning to fill empty space. Even the developers of the most popular open world series know that it's a bad setting for a campaign. That's why Grand Theft Auto loads and unloads specific instances of the world for the campaign. That game's not even a tactical shooter. The open world problems are exacerbated in tactical shooters. The variables become overwhelming and unmanageable. Things that should be important become afterthoughts. Things that should be orderly become chaotic, and that's a big nuisance when you're highly vulnerable. Instead, open levels allow for bite-sized versions of open worlds, taking the wheat but leaving the chaff. What would have been a mess chosen by an algorithm becomes artful. Each stroke of the brush can be a piece of the puzzle, building a portfolio of masterpieces. In case you misunderstood that, the brushstrokes are manual placements by the level designer, the puzzle pieces are the assets, and the portfolio of masterpieces is the campaign of well-designed open levels paced with purpose. To end this section, I'll point out that restarting a mission can be done much faster. Players could immediately restart and get back into the action. It would not spawn the player somewhere drastically different at another time and with no convenient way of replicating the previous scenario. Instead, there can be checkpoints and quick saves to complement the seed system, which allows players to retry the same scenario they failed or switch to a new, fresher one. It's time for dessert. Implementation. I'm going to start by mentioning there should be mission briefings, followed by outfitting of the squad and planning of the mission. All of these things fit in an open level structure. The Ghost should be traveling around great distances, performing direct action and covert operations to prevent the enemy from fortifying or aggressing. This requires exfiltration from the area of operations and insertion into another AO far away. This doesn't work by running around the same area for days or longer. This requires levels. In order to be tactical, the levels should be open. There are many popular games that feature linear or open levels for PvE, player versus environment missions, such as Destiny 2 and Payday 2, and there are tons of players who have played those missions for hundreds or thousands of hours. As if unaware of that fact, some people think that having levels means the game inherently has less replay value than it would have in an open world. That's nonsense. There can literally be infinite replayability. With less time spent on building an open world and optimizing it, time can be spent making a level editor like the one in Ghost Recon 1, allowing players to build infinite numbers of stages and missions. There could also be time to build a level generator that can produce endless stages. Each level would have a seed, making it easier to share your favored stages with others. Even without an editor or a generator, there are great ways to get replay value from open levels, including various game modes and missions for each level. There could be defensive, stealthy, pushing, assassination, rescue, horde, or other modes. However, paired with unique attributes for each soldier, randomness created by alternative spawns is the greatest way to keep players engaged in the same level. The randomness prevents players from quickly memorizing the stage, forcing them to be tactical. The alternative spawns can exist for enemies, vehicles, turrets, pathing, obstacles, interiors, objectives, civilians, hostages, friendlies, window blinds, and even buildings or more. Depending on how long the level designer spends, you could have thousands or more variations of the same stage, each with its own identification seed. The seeds would not only allow you to share the levels with others, but you could also share your plans. By empowering players to share their plans, each of the thousands of seeds for that one level would have infinite ways to be played. The plans could be listed in a browser and would load the seed with the plan. Alternatively, less randomness could be used, and that would allow for plans to be tied to the levels instead of the seeds. Then every seed would have a plan because the developer would make a default one. Either way, plans are a great way to add variety and replay value to open levels. Try to win with your friend's plan by following his instructions, including routes and actions. Plans would set up the player's squad and gear automatically, forcing challenges such as light armor and MP5 SDs only. The developers could also set conditions that award medals for challenges such as no kills. A simple icon and numeral could show how many players succeeded using that particular plan. Players would also be able to rate the plans. One level would have infinite replay value, but there would be many more levels, each with a plan waiting to be fulfilled, and each in a unique locale. By using open levels, you can remove the limitation of trying to logically blend biomes in an open world. Players can traverse the snowy mountains and dusty caves of one country and then trudge through the dense jungle and filthy swamp of another. The architecture, civ pop, fauna, and flora can be vastly different without being jarringly unrealistic. You can fight significantly varied militaries in each of the environments, with each having different weapons, vehicles, tactics, and technology, etc. Of course, even more replay value exists when the time of day and weather can be adjusted by the players. Multiple infiltration and exfiltration points, combined with all of the other factors I have mentioned, will provide endless replayability, all in a format that is inevitably more tactical. In conclusion, Ubisoft should ditch the open world, and that doesn't mean they need to make a corridor shooter or a linear game like Future Soldier. It's easier to be thoughtful when you're not spread too thinly. It's harder to fill a larger space with consideration when it's already full of shallow mechanisms like subpar driving, ridiculous flying, magical parachutes, treasure chests, and queer folk sending you on fetch quests. Open levels have the advantage of being easier to polish, having greater versatility, and still having infinite replayability. They are more tactical, believably diverse, and realistic. Open levels welcome plethoric methods of deepening the Ghost Recon experience into the tactical realm. Certainly, some of these things, even many of them, can potentially be done in an open world. However, it becomes more challenging to do so, and the developers have not proven that they are anywhere near as skilled as they need to be for such a task. We need the developers to prove themselves on a small scale. We do not need to waste the developers' time on filling an open world and adding ways to traverse it. We do not need an open world that spends most of the players' time on boring travel full of brain-dead bots that endlessly and irrationally spawn. A brief loading screen will suffice, sending us to a tailored stage with all angles calculated, all placements deliberate, and all possibilities pondered. Alright, maybe not, but it's still better than an open world. We need intention, we need polish, we need a deep and tactical experience, we need open levels. We need Ghost Recon to be Ghost Recon again.